My brother threw a $50,000 check into the fireplace because he thought it was a prop. My mother laughed and said it was fake news, just like his senility. My sister-in-law Tiffany told me not to embarrass myself by saving it. But when I took that burnt piece of paper to the bank the next morning, the teller did not laugh. She called the branch manager and the police. Before I tell you how that piece of paper destroyed my family, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Nia, and I am 28 years old. At this moment, I was on my knees on a Persian rug, screaming as my hand darted into the flames. "It is a prop, Nia, let it burn." That was the first thing I heard my brother Dante shout as he swirled his $500 glass of wine. The heat from the gas fireplace singed the hair on my arm, but I did not care. My fingers clamped down on the corner of the paper just as the edges started to curl black. I pulled it out and patted the sparks against my jeans, leaving a streak of dark ash on my thigh. "Oh my God, Nia, you are acting like a scavenger." That voice belonged to Tiffany, my brother's wife. She was standing there in her white silk dress looking down at me with that specific brand of pity she reserved for anyone who did not grow up with a trust fund. "It is literally scrap paper," she continued, sipping her Chardonnay. "You are going to ruin the aesthetic of the party over a prank gift." My mother Renee did not ask if my hand was burned. She did not ask if I was okay. She just sighed loudly and pointed at the floor. "Look at the mess you are making. That is soot on the rug, Nia. Do you have any idea how much it costs to clean authentic wool? Get up and stop being dramatic." I sat back on my heels, clutching the paper to my chest. My heart was pounding against my ribs. It was not just paper to me. It was the trembling hand of my grandfather Otis when he gave it to us 10 minutes ago. It was the way he looked at Dante and said, "This is for your future son." And Dante had laughed in his face. Dante had called it a prop from a closed account. I looked down at the check in my hand. The corner was burned off and the paper was warm, but the ink was still legible. $50,000, signed Otis Black. He has been broke since 1999, Nia. Dante laughed, kicking the fender of the fireplace. "He is living in a state-funded nursing home. That check is worth less than the paper it is printed on. He just wanted to look like a big shot for one night. It is pathetic, really." I stood up slowly. The room was spinning. My family stood around me like statues of judgment. They were beautiful and wealthy and cruel. They saw a senile old man trying to buy love with fake money. I saw my grandfather trying to maintain his dignity. "You keep it then," Tiffany sneered, waving her hand dismissively. "Frame it. Put it on your wall in that little apartment of yours. It fits your vibe perfectly." Desperate. They all laughed. My mother, my brother, my sister-in-law, a chorus of people who measured worth by the label on their clothes. I looked straight at them, and then I looked at the check again. I carefully folded the burnt paper and placed it in my pocket. They laughed because they thought it was trash. I kept it because it was the only thing my grandfather had left to give. Or so I thought. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the only person in the room who saw the truth when everyone else saw a joke. Because what happened the next morning at the bank would wipe those smiles off their faces forever. To understand why my brother felt comfortable burning a $50,000 check, you have to see what happened 30 minutes earlier. The atmosphere in Dante's rented mansion was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and greed. My brother was standing by the 10-foot Christmas tree, holding up his wrist to catch the light from the crystal chandelier. "Look at that bezel, baby, that is a genuine oyster perpetual," he announced loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Tiffany shrieked with delight, clutching a limited edition Gucci bag that probably cost more than my entire tuition. They were drunk on materialism, trading gifts that were meant to be displayed on Instagram rather than cherished. The doorbell rang, cutting through their self-congratulatory noise. When I opened the door, the cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of mothballs in old rain. Grandpa Otis stood on the porch, shivering in a coat that had seen better decades. His shoes were scuffed, and his hands were empty except for 3 thin white envelopes. I reached out to hug him, but my mother Renee marched over. Her eyes scanned him, not with love, but with inspection. "Daddy, you are dripping on the hardwood," she snapped. Before he could take a step, she signaled to the housekeeper. "Maria, bring the Sunday Times." I watched in horror as my mother laid sheets of newspaper over the pristine white velvet armchair in the corner. "Sit there, Daddy," she commanded, pointing at the paper. "We just had this upholstered, and I cannot have you ruining it with outside smells." Otis sat down the newspaper, crinkling loudly underneath him like he was a wet dog being allowed inside for a moment of charity. He looked small against the grand furniture. He looked like a guest in a sterile museum, not a father visiting his family. I wanted to scream, but I knew it would only make things worse for him. He reached into his pocket, his hands trembling slightly from either the cold or the nerves. "I have something for you," he said, his voice raspy. "I have been saving this for a long time. It is not much to look at, but it is everything I have." He handed an envelope to Dante, one to me and one to Renee. My mother snatched hers first, her eyes lighting up with a predatory gleam. For a second, she forgot about the wet coat and the newspaper. She thought it was money. She thought the old man had finally sold his burial plot, or cashed out a hidden insurance policy. She tore the seal with a perfectly manicured nail. I held my breath, hoping against hope that she would be kind. She pulled out the single sheet of paper, and her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure disgust. She flicked the paper with her finger, making a sharp sound that echoed in the silent room. "Is this a joke, Daddy? You came all the way here in that coat to give us a piece of paper. I thought you were finally going to contribute to the family expenses, but instead you give us a letter." She let the paper drift from her hand to the floor, as if it were contaminated. That was the moment the cruelty began. I grabbed my grandfather's arm and guided him away from the toxicity of that living room. My mother did not even look up from her wineglass as we walked out. The winter air outside was biting, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that mansion. We walked slowly toward my 10-year-old sedan, which was parked at the very end of the driveway like a shameful secret. Just as I was helping Otis into the passenger seat, a blinding pair of LED headlights swept across us. It was Dante. He was sitting in his leased Mercedes G-Wagon, idling in the driveway just to make a point. He revved the engine loud enough to shake the pavement, sending a cloud of exhaust smoke right into our faces. "Hey, Nia, don't spend it all in one place," he shouted, rolling down his tinted window. "Maybe you can buy a new muffler for that piece of junk." Tiffany leaned across him, laughing shrilly. "Or buy some better clothes," she yelled. Grandpa did not look at them. He waited until Dante peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching, leaving the smell of burnt rubber in the cold night air. He turned to me and his watery eyes were suddenly clear. They were sharp, intelligent. They were the eyes of the man who used to run a business, not the confused old man my family saw. "Nia, listen to me," he said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. His skin was rough like sandpaper but warm. "Do not listen to them. They see what they want to see." I looked at him confused, trying to buckle his seatbelt. "Grandpa, it is okay," I said, trying to soothe him. "I know you wanted to help. It is the thought that counts." He shook his head firmly, stopping my hand. "No, Nia. It is not a thought. It is a test. You go to the bank tomorrow morning. First thing, do not tell your mother. Do not tell Dante. Just go. And do not let that check out of your sight." I drove him back to the Golden Years Rest Home. It was a depressing beige building on the outskirts of the city where the hallways smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. My mother had chosen it because it was the cheapest option available. As I walked him to his small room with its peeling wallpaper and single iron bed, I felt a surge of rage. My brother was living in a mansion, and my mother was drinking vintage wine while their father lived like a pauper. I tucked him in and kissed his forehead. "I promise," I whispered. "I will keep it safe." I walked back to my car, clutching the burnt check in my pocket. I did not believe it was worth $50,000. I thought it was a delusion of a lonely old man. But I decided right then and there that I would cash it. Not for the money, but to prove to my family that his gift meant something to me, even if it was worth nothing to the bank. I started my rattling engine and drove into the darkness, unaware that the piece of paper in my pocket was about to start a war. My studio apartment usually felt like a refuge, but that night it felt like a prison cell of my own making. I sat on my thrifted sofa, the silence of the room broken only by the incessant buzzing of my phone on the coffee table. The family group chat, ironically named Black Excellence, was exploding with notifications. I knew I should not look, but the masochistic part of my brain forced my hand. I unlocked the screen and the blue light illuminated the tears I had refused to let fall in the car. There it was. Dante had been busy. He had taken a photo of me kneeling by the fireplace, desperate and soot-stained, and photoshopped a tattered shawl over my shoulders. He captioned it, "The little match girl waiting for her inheritance." Below it, a stream of crying, laughing emojis from my mother, and even some distant cousins who had not been at the party but were happy to join the mockery. Then came a voice note from Tiffany. I pressed play, and her voice, dripping with that sickeningly sweet condescension, filled my small living room. "Hey, Nia. I know tonight was embarrassing for you, but I actually have a solution. My dad is looking for a new cleaning crew for his firm's downtown office. It is the night shift, so no one would have to see you. It pays minimum wage, which is definitely more than that fake piece of paper you dug out of the fire. Let me know. Okay. We just want you to be realistic." I threw the phone onto the cushion beside me, as if it were a venomous snake. Realistic. That was their favorite word for me. Realistic meant settling. Realistic meant accepting that I was the help, not the heir. My chest tightened with a familiar shame, the kind that had been cultivated in me since childhood. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy for holding on to a scrap of paper from a man who wore a coat from the 80s. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the check. It smelled of smoke and expensive cologne, a sensory reminder of the war between my grandfather's dignity and my brother's arrogance. The fire had singed the top right corner, destroying the bank's logo, but the rest was intact. $50,000, written in blue ink that had slightly bled into the paper. The signature at the bottom was shaky but firm. Otis Black. I traced the letters of his name. Why would he set me up for humiliation? If this was a prank, it was cruel. But I remembered his eyes in the driveway. They were not the eyes of a prankster. They were the eyes of a general giving orders before a battle. I did not sleep that night. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows of passing cars move across the plaster. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's sneer and heard Dante's laughter. I kept the check on my nightstand under the lamp, anchored by a glass of water. I waited for the sun to rise, not because I wanted a new day, but because I needed the bank to open. I needed to know if I was the fool they said I was, or if I was holding the key to their destruction. When the first gray light of dawn touched the window, I got up dressed in my best blazer and prepared to face the truth. The First National Bank downtown was a cathedral of glass and steel that made me feel smaller than I already was. I stood on the sidewalk, smoothing down the lapels of my polyester blazer. It was a $20 clearance rack find that I usually wore for job interviews, but today it felt like a costume. My reflection in the revolving doors looked terrified, but I forced my feet to move. Inside, the air was conditioned to a crisp freeze, and the silence was heavy. I clutched the check in my pocket so hard my knuckles turned white. I approached the only open window. The nameplate read, Brittany. She was young, maybe 22, with flawless makeup and long acrylic nails that clicked against the marble counter. She did not look up from her phone until I cleared my throat. "Can I help you?" she asked, dragging out the vowels as if speaking to me was a monumental effort. Her eyes raked over my cheap suit and settled on my scuffed shoes with a look of bored disdain. She reminded me exactly of the girls my brother dated. I pulled the plastic Ziploc bag out of my pocket. Inside lay the charred remains of my grandfather's gift. "I would like to deposit this, please," I said, sliding it under the glass partition. Brittany looked at the bag like it contained a dead mouse. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that reminded me of Tiffany. Ma'am, we do not accept trash, she said, pushing the bag back toward me with the tip of her pen. That is clearly damaged and probably void. Please step aside so I can help a real customer. Her hand was already reaching for the next button. I felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising in my neck. This was exactly what Dante had predicted. I was embarrassing myself. But then I remembered Otis's grip on my hand and the clarity in his eyes. I planted my feet firmly on the polished floor. It is not trash, I said, my voice trembling slightly, but gaining volume. The routing number and account number are intact. You are required by policy to attempt a scan. Scan it or get your manager. Brittany rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. Fine, she sighed, snapping her gum. But when the machine rejects it, I am calling security to escort you out for wasting my time. She ripped the check out of the bag with aggressive force. She fed it into the scanner, not caring if it tore further. I held my breath. The machine whirred. It made a loud mechanical crunch. Then a cheerful beep echoed through the silent lobby. Brittany looked at her screen, ready to smirk. Instead, her jaw dropped. The screen flashed a bright, urgent green. Her face drained of all color, leaving her makeup looking like a mask on a ghost. She looked from the screen to me and back to the screen, her hands starting to shake uncontrollably. Brittany stood frozen behind the counter, her mouth slightly open as the green light on her monitor bathed her terrified face. Before she could stammer out an apology, the heavy glass doors of the executive elevator burst open. A man in a tailored navy suit rushed into the lobby. I recognized him immediately from the plaque on the wall. It was Mr. Henderson, the branch manager. He was not walking, he was practically running, adjusting his tie as he moved with a frantic energy that silenced the entire room. He bypassed the line of impatient customers and pushed through the gate behind the counter. He did not even look at Brittany, he looked directly at me. "Ms. Nia," he said, his voice breathless but respectful. "I am so terribly sorry for the wait. Please forgive my staff. They are not trained to handle accounts of your caliber." He bowed. It was not a figurative nod. It was a genuine bow of respect right there in the middle of the lobby, where moments ago I had been treated like a vagrant. The security guard who had been inching toward me stopped in his tracks. Brittany looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I stood there clutching my purse, stunned into silence. I expected him to tell me it was a mistake. I expected him to say the system was glitching. "Please come with me," Mr. Henderson said, gesturing toward the elevator. "We have prepared the private suite for you." I followed him, my cheap shoes squeaking slightly on the polished marble. We rode up to the top floor in silence. When the doors opened, the air smelled of expensive leather and fresh orchids. He led me into an office that was larger than my entire apartment. He gestured for me to sit in a high-backed chair while he bustled around pouring tea from a silver service. "Mr. Henderson," I finally managed to speak, my voice trembling. "Is the check real? My brother burned it. I thought it was ruined." "Mr." Henderson sat behind his massive mahogany desk and placed the charred plastic bag gently on the blotter as if it were a fragile artifact. "Ms. Nia, this is not just a check. It is a biometric activation key. The damage to the paper is irrelevant because the magnetic signature is intact. This draws directly from the Black Oak Master Trust." He typed rapidly on his keyboard. I had never heard of a master trust. My grandfather lived in a room with peeling wallpaper. He hoarded ketchup packets. This had to be a misunderstanding. Mr. Henderson turned his monitor toward me. The screen displayed a routing number I did not recognize and a transaction log that had just been processed. There, in bold black numbers, was the deposit. $50,000. Available immediately. "But that is not all," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes twinkling with a professional secret. "By depositing this check, you have successfully verified your identity as a beneficiary. This $50,000 is just the initial stipend. It triggers the activation of your access to the broader portfolio." I stared at the screen. The numbers blurred. $50,000. That was more than I made in a year. It was freedom. It was a new car, it was a deposit on a condo, but more than that, it was vindication. Otis had not lied, he had not lost his mind. He had given me a sword and I had almost let Dante melt it. My hand shook violently as I reached for the teacup. I tried to lift it to my lips, but my nerves failed me. The china cup slipped from my fingers and crashed onto the saucer, sending hot tea splashing over the expensive desk blotter. I gasped, jumping up. "I am so sorry," I cried, reaching for napkins. "I am so clumsy." Mr. Henderson did not even flinch. He smiled warmly and waved his hand. "Do not worry about it, Mrs. Nia. We can buy 1,000 desks. What matters is that you have finally arrived. Welcome to Black Oak." Mr. Henderson returned from the vault carrying a small metal safety deposit box that looked like it had survived a war. The gray paint was chipped, revealing the rusted steel underneath, and it stood in stark contrast to the polished mahogany of his office. He placed it gently in front of me, as if it were filled with diamonds. "This was entrusted to us by Mr. Otis Black, 20 years ago," he said, his voice hushed. His instructions were explicit. It was only to be released to the individual who successfully deposited the activation check. My hands were still trembling as I reached for the latch. I expected stacks of cash or maybe gold bars. Instead, when the lid creaked open, I found only 2 items: a heavy ring of rusted keys that looked like they belonged to a medieval dungeon, and a single folded piece of yellowed legal pad paper. I unfolded the paper. It was a hand-drawn map. The lines were shaky but deliberate, leading to a specific address in the Southside Industrial District. Below the map was a note written in my grandfather's distinct cursive. "Nia, if you are reading this, you chose faith over pride." The check was just the key to the front door. "These keys are for the kingdom. Do not trust your mother. Do not trust Dante. Go alone." I ran my thumb over the ink. The Southside Industrial District was a ghost town of abandoned factories and weeds. It was the part of the city people drove through with their doors locked. Why would my grandfather send me there? "Mr. Henderson." "What is this?" I asked, holding up the keys. "Is this some kind of property deed?" Mr. Henderson shook his head, professionally blank. "I cannot say, Miss Nia. My role is strictly custodial regarding the financial instrument. The physical assets are managed independently. However, I can tell you that the trust covers all maintenance fees and taxes associated with whatever those keys open." "And Ms. Nia?" He leaned in slightly, dropping his corporate mask for a second. "Your grandfather was a very smart man. He knew who would burn the paper and who would save it." I walked out of the bank 10 minutes later. The sun was shining, but the world looked different. The people walking past me in their expensive suits did not intimidate me anymore. I had $50,000 in my pocket and a mystery that felt heavier than the metal box in my purse. I got into my battered sedan. The engine sputtered as usual, but this time I did not feel embarrassment. I felt like a spy on a mission. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dante. "Mom says bring the car back, she needs to go to the salon. Stop pretending you have things to do." I looked at the message and laughed, a real genuine laugh that bubbled up from my chest. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I was not going to the salon. I was going to the South Side, and for the first time in my life, I was not asking for permission. My 10-year-old sedan rattled into the parking lot of Dominion Motors, sounding like a lawnmower choking on rocks. It was the kind of noise that usually made me shrink into my seat, praying no one was looking. But today, I parked it right next to a gleaming showroom model and killed the engine. Silence had never felt so heavy. A salesman was leaning against a red sports car, texting. His name tag read Brad, and he had the kind of gelled hair that looked hard to the touch. He glanced at my rusted car, then at my cheap polyester blazer, and went back to his phone. He did not straighten up. He did not smile. He did not welcome me. In his mind, I was a waste of time, a tire kicker who probably could not even afford an oil change. I walked right up to him. Excuse me, I said loud enough to make him jump slightly. I am interested in the SUV in the window, the black one with the reinforced chassis. Brad looked at me like I had just asked to buy the moon. He let out a sigh that was more like a hiss of air. Listen, sweetie, he said, slipping his phone into his pocket but still not standing up straight. That is the Commander Elite. It starts at 60,000. The used lot is 2 blocks down. They have some nice Civics that might be more in your price range. We run credit checks here and I do not want to ding your score unnecessarily. The old Nia would have apologized and walked away. The old Nia would have felt the shame burn her cheeks. But I was not the old Nia anymore. I was the granddaughter of Otis Black, and I had a mission. I do not want a used Civic, I said, my voice steady and cold. I want the Commander. I want the safety package. I want the tinted windows, and I want to drive it off the lot today. Brad laughed. It was a short bark of a laugh. Look, I appreciate the ambition, but financing on a vehicle like that requires a significant down payment and proof of income. Unless you won the lottery this morning, I think you are in the wrong place. I reached into my purse and pulled out the debit card Mr. Henderson had issued me 15 minutes ago. It was black, heavy, and cold. I am not financing, I said, holding the card up so it caught the sunlight. I am paying for the down payment in full right now, $50,000. The rest goes on a scheduled draft. Run it. Brad froze. His eyes locked onto the card. He recognized the bank logo. It was the kind of bank that did not issue debit cards to people with bad credit. His posture changed instantly. He stood up so fast he almost tripped over his own feet. His smirk vanished, replaced by a desperate, sweaty smile. I am so sorry, ma'am, he stammered, wiping his hands on his pants before offering me a handshake which I ignored. I did not realize. Please, right this way. Let me get you a cappuccino. We can have the paperwork done in 20 minutes. I walked past him into the cool air of the showroom. I did not buy the red sports car. That was Dante's style, flashy and fragile. I bought the Commander. It was built like a tank. It was silent. It was safe. 30 minutes later, I sat in the driver's seat. The smell of fresh leather filled my lungs. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the solid weight of the machine under my control. I looked at my old sedan in the rearview mirror, abandoned in the lot. It looked like a shed skin. I put the SUV in drive and pulled out onto the highway. The engine purred a low, dangerous sound. For the first time in my life, I was not just surviving traffic. I was commanding it. I pulled the massive black Commander Elite into the driveway of my mother's colonial house. It dwarfed Dante's leased Mercedes sitting next to it, like a wolf standing next to a house cat. The tinted windows reflected the manicured lawn that I had spent my childhood raking while Dante played video games. I killed the engine, and for a moment, I just sat there. This was usually the part where my stomach churned with anxiety before facing them, but today the leather seat felt like armor. I stepped out and the heavy door shut with a solid, expensive thud that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I walked through the front door without knocking. In the kitchen, my mother Renee and Dante were sitting at the quartz island, picking at a spread of pastries and expensive fruit. Dante was scrolling on his phone, probably checking how many likes his cruel meme about me had gotten. Renee was sipping a mimosa at 10 in the morning. They both looked up as I entered. Their eyes went past me to the window where the sunlight was gleaming off the chrome grille of my new truck. Dante stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. "Who is here?" he asked, looking around nervously. "Is that a repo man? Did they come for your junk car, Nia?" "It is mine," I said calmly, walking over to the counter to pour myself a glass of water. I did not ask for permission, I just took a glass from the cabinet. Renee let out a shrill laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Yours. Do not lie to me, Nia. You cannot even afford to fix the muffler on that death trap you drive." She walked to the window and squinted. "That is an $80,000 truck." She spun around, her face twisted with a sudden ugly suspicion. "Who is he, Nia? Who is the man? Are you sleeping with someone for this? Is this what you have resorted to? Selling your body?" Dante snorted. Mom, look at her. No one is paying that much for her. She probably stole it for a joyride. The police are going to be here in 5 minutes. You better give the keys back before you get arrested. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and toxic. They could not conceive of a world where I was successful. In their narrative, I had to be either a failure or a criminal. They would rather believe I was a thief than believe I was worthy. I reached into my purse. I did not scream. I did not cry. I pulled out the crisp yellow bill of sale stamped paid in full. I slapped the paper onto the cold quartz counter. It made a sharp, satisfying smack that silenced them both. Dante looked at the paper, then at me, his eyes wide with confusion. I pointed a finger at him. You burned $50,000 last night, Dante, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. That prop you threw in the fire, it was real. I deposited it this morning. Grandpa is not broke. And unlike you, I know how to spot value when I see it. Renee snatched the paper, reading the numbers, her hands starting to shake. Paid in full, she whispered. This is impossible. Otis does not have this kind of money. He is a pauper. It is very possible, I said, taking a sip of my water. And by the way, Mom, I am taking my old boxes out of the garage. I do not want anything of mine staying in this house a second longer. You can keep your pastries. I can afford my own breakfast now. Dante stared at the bill of sale for exactly 3 seconds before his brain processed the reality of what he had done. He let out a sound that was half scream and half sob, a guttural noise that did not belong in a kitchen with quartz countertops. He scrambled past me, knocking over a heavy wooden bar stool which crashed loudly against the floor. He did not run to the door. He ran to the stainless steel trash compactor in the corner where the housekeeper dumped the fireplace ashes every morning. It was a pathetic sight. My brother, who spent more time grooming his beard than working, was now on his knees digging frantically through coffee grounds, orange peels, and eggshells. He was ruining his Italian silk trousers, but he did not care. He was plunging his hands into the garbage looking for the charred remains of the fortune he had mocked. It is gone, he shrieked, pulling out handfuls of gray soot that disintegrated in his fingers. It is all dust. It is all gone. He looked up at me, his face smeared with ash and tears. You knew, Nia. You knew it was real and you let me burn it. You thief! While Dante lost his mind, Tiffany went ice cold. She did not scream. She did not cry. She stood perfectly still, her eyes narrowing into slits as she processed the shift in power. She was a lawyer's daughter, and she knew that crying did not fix problems, but litigation did. She pulled her phone from her Gucci bag and dialed a number she clearly had on speed dial. Daddy, pick up, she said, her voice sharp and authoritative, cutting through Dante's wailing. We have a situation. No, it is Nia. She swindled Otis. Yes, she somehow got him to sign a significant check, and now she has cashed it and bought a luxury vehicle. I watched her twist the narrative in real time. In less than 30 seconds, I went from being the broke sister to the master manipulator who took advantage of a senile old man. Tiffany looked me dead in the eye while she spoke to her father. Yes, she took advantage of his dementia. We need to freeze the assets immediately. That money belongs to the estate, which means it belongs to the family. Nia does not have the legal standing to manage those funds. Renee finally snapped out of her shock. She looked from Dante sobbing over the garbage to Tiffany's cold determination, and then at me. The realization that there was real money involved and that she had been left out of it terrified her. She rushed to the kitchen doorway, blocking my exit. Nia, give me the keys to that truck, she demanded, holding out a trembling hand. You are not going anywhere until we sort this out. You clearly confused your grandfather. That money was meant for the house, for Dante's business, not for you to play rich. You are going to return that car and transfer the money to my account for safekeeping. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that stopped Renee in her tracks. I walked right up to her. I was taller than her in my heels, and for the first time I felt it. You guys are incredible, I said, shaking my head. You threw the money in the fire. I saved it. And now you want to punish me for not being as stupid as you are. I stepped around her, ignoring her hand. Call your lawyers, Tiffany. Call the police. I do not care. But do not expect me to pay for your mistakes ever again. I walked out the front door, leaving the chaos behind me. I could hear Dante still screaming about the ashes as the heavy door clicked shut. I climbed into my Commander Elite and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them through the kitchen window. A family of vultures fighting over a carcass that had suddenly flown away. I did not feel guilty. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. But as I turned onto the main road and saw Tiffany still talking furiously on her phone, I gripped the steering wheel tight. I knew this wasn't over. They were not going to let $50,000 go without a fight. And neither was I. Renee drove her BMW into the parking lot of the Golden Years rest home with enough speed to leave skid marks on the cracked asphalt. She did not park in a visitor spot. She pulled right up to the front entrance, blocking the wheelchair ramp. Dante jumped out of the passenger seat, holding a leather portfolio that contained a power of attorney document Tiffany had drafted in less than 10 minutes. They were on a mission, and panic was their fuel. They marched past the reception desk, ignoring the protests of the elderly volunteer. They burst into room 3B, where Otis was sitting by the window, staring at a pigeon on the ledge. He looked up, surprised, as his daughter and grandson invaded his small sanctuary. "Daddy, pack your things," Renee announced, breathless and frantic. "You are leaving this dump immediately. We cannot believe Nia let you live in this squalor. We are taking you home." Otis gripped the arms of his chair. "Home. I am home, Renee. I have been here for 5 years. You put me here." "That was a mistake," Dante cut in, shoving the portfolio onto the small bedside table. "We were confused, but we want to make it right. We want you to live with us in the mansion. You will have your own suite, a private chef. But first we need to handle some paperwork to get you discharged." He uncapped a pen and thrust it into Otis's hand. "Just sign here, Grandpa. It authorizes us to handle your transfer and manage your medical decisions so Nia cannot hurt you anymore. She is unstable, Grandpa. She stole money from you. We are trying to protect you." Otis looked at the document. His hand trembled. He looked at Renee, who was throwing his few shirts into a garbage bag. He looked at Dante, who was sweating profusely. He knew exactly what they were doing. They were not rescuing him. They were capturing him. But he also knew that if he resisted now, they might get violent. He needed to buy time. He scribbled a shaky signature that looked nothing like the one on the check I had deposited. "Good." Dante snatched the paper back. "Let's go." They practically dragged him out of the facility. When the head nurse tried to stop them, Renee threatened to sue the facility for elder neglect. They shoved Otis into the back of the BMW and sped away, leaving only dust behind. 2 hours later, I walked into the Golden Years holding a bag of Otis's favorite burgers and the keys to the Commander. I wanted to take him for a ride. I wanted him to see that his investment was safe. "Hi, Nurse Clara," I said, smiling at the front desk. "Is he awake? I brought lunch." Clara looked at me, and her face was a mask of pity. "Nia, honey, you didn't know. Your mother and brother came. They took him." I dropped the bag of food. The smell of grease and onions filled the air. "Took him? What do you mean, took him?" "They checked him out," Clara said, her voice trembling. "They had paperwork. They said they were moving him to Dante's house. They said—" She hesitated. "They said you were dangerous, Nia. They said they were rescuing him from you." I ran down the hall to room 3B. The door was open. The bed was stripped to the mattress. The closet was empty. The picture of my grandmother that he kept on the nightstand was gone. The room was cold and sterile, as if he had never existed. I stood in the middle of the empty room, and a cold dread settled in my stomach. They did not just want the money, they wanted the source, and now they had him trapped in a house where no one could hear him scream. I pulled out my phone and dialed Dante. Straight to voicemail. I dialed Renee. Blocked. I gripped the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. They thought they had won. They thought they had cut off the head of the snake. But they forgot one thing. I had the keys to the warehouse, and I was not the scared little girl they remembered. I was coming for him. My phone lit up with a notification that made my stomach turn. Dante Real Estate is going live. I sat in my parked SUV outside the empty nursing home and tapped the screen. The video loaded instantly, showing a perfectly framed shot of Dante's living room. A fire was crackling in the background, and soft jazz was playing. It looked like a scene from a magazine, but I knew it was a stage set for a crime. Tiffany was holding the camera. Her face was filtered to perfection, and her voice was a hushed, theatrical whisper. "Hey guys, thank you so much for the prayers. We finally got him out." She panned the camera to the leather recliner where Grandpa Otis was sitting. He was not moving. His head was lolled to one side and his eyes were half open, staring blankly at the ceiling fan. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. "We are just so relieved." Dante stepped into the frame, placing a protective hand on Otis's shoulder. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, looking every bit the concerned grandson. The conditions at that facility were horrific, but what is worse is learning that family members we trusted were actually exploiting him. My jaw dropped. They were projecting their own sins onto me in real time. Tiffany zoomed in on Otis's face. "He looks so peaceful now," she cooed. "We think his medication was being withheld so someone could manipulate him into signing checks. But he is safe now. He is with family who actually cares about his well-being, not his wallet." I watched the comments roll in on the side of the screen. They were scrolling so fast I could barely read them. "God bless you, Dante. You are a hero. Shame on the sister. I hope she goes to jail. Money is the root of all evil." It was a landslide of public opinion. In a matter of minutes, they had rewritten the narrative. I was no longer the granddaughter who brought him burgers and visited every Sunday. I was the predator, and they were the saviors. Otis made a small sound, a low groan of confusion. Dante immediately patted his shoulder a little too hard. "Shh, Grandpa, just rest. You are home." I looked closer at the screen. Otis was not just tired, he was drugged. His movements were sluggish and heavy. They had sedated him to keep him compliant for the camera. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was hot and sharp. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel so hard the horn honked briefly, startling a nurse walking to her car. They had weaponized the internet against me. They had stolen my grandfather, and now they were destroying my reputation to cover their tracks. I looked at the caption below the video. "Rescuing Grandpa from the leech. Hashtag family first. Hashtag elder abuse awareness." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I could not watch another second of their performance. The world saw a loving reunion. I saw a hostage video. I started the engine of the Commander. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a cold, focused rage. They wanted to play the hero in the court of public opinion. Fine. But I had the evidence that would expose their entire script, and I was done being the silent villain. The pounding on my apartment door was not a request. It was a command. It shattered the silence of the early morning and woke me from a restless sleep where I had been dreaming of my grandfather's drugged eyes. I glanced at the digital clock on my nightstand. 6:12 in the morning. No one visits at this hour with good news. I threw on my robe and stumbled to the peephole. My heart hammered against my ribs when I saw the reflection of blue strobe lights bouncing off the hallway walls. Two uniformed officers stood there, flanked by a woman in a severe gray suit holding a thick clipboard. I opened the door, keeping the chain locked. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep and fear. The officer in front did not smile. "Nia Black," he asked. "Open the door, ma'am. We have a warrant to search these premises and a court order to seize all electronic devices regarding an active investigation into financial fraud and elder abuse." The words hit me like physical blows. I undid the chain, and they pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. The woman in the gray suit stepped into my living room, looking around my modest apartment with clinical detachment. "I am Agent Miller from Adult Protective Services," she announced. We received a credible report accompanied by digital evidence that you coerced Mr. Otis Black, a vulnerable adult with diagnosed dementia, into signing over financial assets while he was mentally incapacitated. Tiffany. This had Tiffany's fingerprints all over it. She had taken the live stream video and the power of attorney document she forced Grandpa to sign and weaponized the legal system against me. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room as the officers began tearing through my personal space. They pulled the cushions off my sofa. They dumped the contents of my purse onto the kitchen counter. "That is ridiculous," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My grandfather is sound of mind. He gave me that check willingly. You can ask the bank manager, Mr. Henderson. He verified everything." Agent Miller did not even look up from her clipboard. "We have already contacted the bank. Due to the allegations of fraud and the disputed mental state of the account holder, all assets have been frozen. That includes your personal checking account and the funds from the Black Oak Trust. You currently have zero access to any capital." Frozen. The word echoed in my head. I had no money. I had no access to the legal defense I would need to fight this. I reached for my phone on the coffee table. "I need to call my lawyer," I said. The officer intercepted my hand before I could touch the device. "I am afraid not, ma'am," he said, grabbing my phone. "This is evidence. It contains text messages and location data relevant to the case. It comes with us along with your laptop." He dropped my phone into a clear plastic evidence bag. The sound of the Ziploc sealing shut felt like a prison door closing. I watched helplessly as they packed up my digital life. My contacts, my emails, the photos of the check, the video of Dante burning it. Everything was on that phone and laptop. They were stripping me bare, leaving me with no way to communicate and no way to prove my innocence. When they finally left carrying boxes of my belongings, the silence that returned to the apartment was deafening. I stood in the center of the room, shivering not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization of what they had done. They had not just sued me. They had erased me. I was cut off from the world with no money, no phone, and a criminal investigation hanging over my head. Tiffany had played her trump card, but as I looked at the empty spot on the table where my keys used to be, I realized they had missed one thing. The keys to the warehouse were in my coat pocket hanging by the door. I was isolated, but I was not defeated yet. I walked into the logistics center, hoping the hum of the conveyor belts would drown out the panic rising in my throat. I was wrong. The moment I swiped my badge, the security guard looked down at his feet, refusing to make eye contact. I walked onto the main floor, and the usual morning chatter died instantly. Dozens of employees I had managed for 3 years suddenly found the concrete floor fascinating. The silence was heavy and suffocating, like the air before a tornado. My supervisor, Mr. Vance, was waiting for me by the time clock. He was a man who hated conflict almost as much as he hated inefficiency. He did not say hello. He did not ask why I looked like I had not slept in 24 hours. "Nia, my office," he said, turning on his heel. "Now." I followed him into the glass-walled fishbowl that overlooked the warehouse floor. I could feel the eyes of every packer and driver burning into my back. Mr. Vance did not sit down. He stood behind his desk and turned his monitor toward me. "We received an email this morning," he said, his voice flat. "It was sent from an anonymous account to the entire board of directors and the HR department. The subject line is criminal investigation regarding employee Nia Black." I looked at the screen. There it was, a scanned copy of the police warrant that had been served at my apartment less than 2 hours ago. Dante. He must have taken a picture of it while the officers were distracted. Or maybe Tiffany had her father pull it from the public record instantly. They had moved with terrifying speed. "Mr. Vance," I started, my voice shaking. "This is a family dispute. It is retaliation because I stood up to them. I have not been charged with anything." Mr. Vance held up a hand, stopping me. "It does not matter, Nia. This report alleges financial fraud and elder abuse. We handle sensitive inventory here. We cannot have someone with a clouded financial record in a management position. It is a liability insurance issue. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was already printed and signed. You are being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending the result of the investigation. Is it paid? I asked, knowing the answer before he gave it. Unpaid, he said, avoiding my eyes. You need to hand over your badge and clear out your desk. Security will escort you to your vehicle. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This job was my lifeline. Without it, I could not pay rent. I could not pay for a lawyer. I could not even buy gas for the commander. Dante knew exactly what he was doing. He was not just attacking my reputation, he was cutting off my oxygen. I walked to my cubicle in a daze. I packed my few personal items into a cardboard box. A mug, a framed photo of me and Grandpa Otis fishing, a spare sweater. Every movement felt heavy. The warehouse was silent, watching the manager become the outcast. I heard a whisper from the break room. I knew she was shady. She bought that new truck out of nowhere. I walked out the back exit, flanked by a security guard I had shared coffee with yesterday. He took my badge and closed the heavy steel door behind me. The lock clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the empty parking lot. I stood there holding my box, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I had no job, no money, no family. I was completely alone. But as I reached into my pocket for my car keys, my fingers brushed against the cold, rusted iron of the warehouse keys. They had taken everything visible, but they had missed the one thing that mattered. The rain hammered against the roof of the Commander Elite, sounding like 1,000 fists demanding entry. I sat in the driver's seat, parked in the furthest corner of the logistics center lot, unable to move. The engine was off, and the silence inside the cabin was heavy enough to crush me. In the span of 4 hours, I had lost my job, my access to money, and my reputation. The only thing I owned was this truck and a tank of gas. I rested my forehead against the cool leather of the steering wheel and let the tears finally fall. They were hot and angry. I was 28 years old, and I was effectively homeless. The world outside was gray and hostile. My phone was gone, so I could not even call my best friend to cry. I was completely severed from the grid. A dark thought crept into my mind. It would be so easy to just drive to Dante's house. I could park this $80,000 truck in his driveway and leave the keys on the seat. I could walk to the front door and fall to my knees. I could apologize. I could say I was wrong, that I was jealous and confused. I could beg my mother to take me back, even if it meant sleeping on the floor and being their servant for the rest of my life. At least then I would have a roof over my head. At least the terror of the unknown would stop. I lifted my head and looked at my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My eyes were red and swollen. My cheap blazer was wrinkled. I looked exactly like the failure they always told me I was. Maybe Tiffany was right. Maybe I was just a leech trying to swim in waters too deep for me. I reached for the door handle, ready to surrender. But then the image flashed in my mind. Grandpa Otis slumped in that leather chair, his mouth slightly open, his eyes glazed over with a chemical fog. I remembered the way Dante patted him like a pet. I remembered the caption, "Rescuing Grandpa." They were not rescuing him, they were burying him alive. If I gave up now, I was not just saving myself, I was signing his death warrant. They would keep him drugged until he forgot his own name, and then they would drain every cent he had left. The thought made my stomach lurch. I realized then that my dignity was not the only thing at stake. His life was. I pulled my hand back from the door handle. I reached into my pocket, and my fingers closed around the cold, jagged metal of the warehouse keys. The police had taken my phone, my laptop, and my badge. But they had missed this. The one thing Otis had wanted me to have. I wiped my face with my sleeve. The tears stopped. A cold resolve replaced the panic. I was not going to Dante's house. I was not going to apologize for surviving. I pressed the start button, and the engine roared to life, a powerful sound that vibrated through my chest. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving my old life behind in the rain. I did not know what was waiting for me at the address in the box. It might be an empty building. it might be a trap. But it was the only road left. I turned onto the highway heading toward the Southside Industrial District. The rain was still falling, but I didn't care. I was driving into the storm, and for the first time I was ready to become the lightning. I parked the Commander Elite in a shadowed alleyway 3 blocks from the coordinates on the map. The Southside Industrial District was a skeleton of what it used to be. Broken windows stared down at me like hollow eyes, and the only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain on the pavement. I pulled my hood up and stepped out into the storm. I felt exposed. I was a fugitive in my own city, stripped of my status and my protection. The main gate was secured with a heavy padlock and topped with razor wire. I found a section of the perimeter fence that had been bent inward, probably by scavengers looking for copper wire. I squeezed through the gap, the jagged metal tearing the sleeve of my blazer. I did not care. I was inside. The ground was a minefield of broken glass and rusted metal hidden beneath puddles of oily water. A sudden beam of light swept across the wet asphalt just yards from where I stood. I dove behind a stack of rotting pallets, my heart hammering against my ribs. A security truck rolled slowly past, its tires crunching on the gravel. Then came the sound that froze my blood, the low, menacing growl of a guard dog. I pressed my hand over my mouth. If the dog caught my scent, it was over. I would be arrested for trespassing, and Tiffany would have the final nail for my coffin. I waited until the taillights of the truck faded around the corner. I sprinted across the open yard, my boots splashing in the muck. The map in my head said the building was in the northeast sector. I ran past rows of silent, decaying warehouses, their metal siding groaning in the wind like dying beasts. Finally, I saw it. Building 18. It looked worse than the others. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned gray with rot. The brickwork was crumbling. It looked like a place where dreams went to die. Doubt seized me. Had Otis sent me to a ruin? Was this just the remnants of a failed investment from 30 years ago? Had I risked everything for a pile of rubble? I approached the small steel service door. It was covered in graffiti and rust. I pulled the heavy iron keyring from my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them once, the metal clattering loudly against the concrete. I froze, waiting for the dogs to return. Silence. I picked up the keys and found the one that matched the jagged profile of the lock. I slid it in. It met resistance. It felt seized by decades of oxidation. I pushed harder, ignoring the grit grinding inside the mechanism. With a sharp metallic crack, the bolt turned. The door groaned open, revealing absolute darkness inside. I stepped over the threshold and pulled the door shut behind me, sealing myself in the tomb of my grandfather's secrets. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of the rain and the howling wind. I stood in absolute darkness, my breathing ragged and loud in the enclosed space. I expected the air to smell of mold and dead rats. I expected to feel cobwebs brushing against my face. Instead, the air was crisp and cold. It smelled sterile. It smelled like ozone and expensive machinery. I fumbled against the wall, searching for a light switch. My hand hit a smooth metal panel, not crumbling brick. A sensor beeped softly, and suddenly the space was flooded with blinding white light. I threw my hands up to shield my eyes. When I finally lowered them, I gasped so hard I nearly choked. I was not standing in a derelict warehouse. I was standing inside a fortress. The rotting brick exterior was just a shell, a facade designed to fool the world. Inside the space was a pristine cathedral of industry. To my left, rows of server banks hummed with a low, powerful vibration, their blue status lights blinking in a rhythmic dance. To my right, massive industrial freezer units stretched all the way to the 30-foot ceiling, their digital temperature gauges glowing a soft red. The floor was not cracked concrete. It was polished epoxy gleaming under the high bay LED lights. I took a hesitant step forward, my wet boots squeaking on the pristine floor. This was not a storage unit for old furniture. This was a state-of-the-art logistics hub, a data center, a gold mine hidden in the belly of a beast. My grandfather had not been hoarding pennies. He had been building an empire right under the noses of the people who called him worthless. Freeze. The command came from the shadows between the server racks. It was deep, gravelly, and terrified me more than the guard dog outside. A beam of tactical light hit me squarely in the chest, blinding me again. I froze, raising my hands slowly. "Please," I said, my voice trembling. "I have a key. My name is Nia. I am Otis Black's granddaughter." The light did not waver for a long, terrifying second. Then it lowered slowly. "You have his eyes," the voice said softer now. A figure stepped out from the darkness. He was an older man, a black man in his 60s, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit that looked completely out of place in a warehouse. He moved with a military precision. He clicked off the flashlight and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I am Saul," he said, walking toward me. "I have been the caretaker of the Black Oak facility since 1995. He stopped 3 feet away from me and looked at the rusted keys in my hand. Then he did something that made my knees weak. He bowed. It was a deep, respectful bow. "Welcome home, Miss Nia," he said, a small smile breaking through his stoic expression. "Mr. Otis told me this day would come. He has been waiting 20 years for the right person to open that door, and it seems you finally arrived." Saul gestured for me to follow him deeper into the facility. We walked past rows of autonomous forklifts charging in silent unison and through a set of double doors that led to a command center overlooking the loading docks. Monitors covered the walls displaying real-time GPS tracking of a fleet of trucks moving across the state. It looked like mission control for a space launch, not a food warehouse. "Your mother and uncle believe a very specific story," Saul said, standing in front of a digital map of the Midwest. "They believe Otis sold his grocery store chain in 1999 because he was losing his touch. They believe he made a few bad investments and drank away the profits, leaving him destitute. That is the narrative they tell themselves to justify why they stopped visiting him." I looked at the screen. The name Black Oak Logistics was tagged on dozens of trucks moving on the highway. "I don't understand," I said. "If he didn't lose the money, where did it go?" Saul smiled, a small, knowing expression that lit up his eyes. "He didn't lose it, Miss Nia." He pivoted. Otis saw that the future wasn't in brick-and-mortar retail. It was in the supply chain. He sold the storefronts, but he kept the distribution network. He reorganized everything under a holding company that didn't bear his name. Black Oak. He tapped the glass of the window overlooking the vast floor. "Every major grocery chain in the state rents cold storage space from us. We handle the logistics for 60% of the perishable goods entering the city." "Your grandfather didn't go broke. He went underground. He wanted to build something that would last for generations, not just something that would buy a new Mercedes every year." I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought about the frayed coat Otis wore, the way he saved napkins, the way he let Renee talk down to him about money, why I whispered, why live in that nursing home, why let them treat him like garbage? Because he had to know, Saul said, turning to face me. He had to know who was loyal. When your grandmother died, he saw the sharks circling, Renee wanting a bigger house, Dante demanding sports cars. He realized they loved his wallet, not him. So he closed the wallet. He played the part of the senile failed businessman to see who would stay. Saul walked over to a secure terminal and typed in a code. He pulled up a balance sheet and projected it onto the main screen. The numbers were staggering. "The $50,000 check was just a test of character," Saul said softly. "It was pocket change. This is the reality. The real estate assets alone are valued at $8 million. The operating capital and investments bring the total portfolio to just over $20 million. $20 million. The number echoed in the silent room. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. I wasn't just looking at money. I was looking at a test that my entire family had failed spectacularly. They had burned a bridge to an empire because it looked like a dirt road. "This is not a lottery win," Miss Nia Saul said, his voice grave. "This is a job." Otis didn't leave you a pile of cash to spend on vacations. He left you a company to run. He left you a legacy to protect. And right now, that legacy is under attack. If they get guardianship over him, they don't just get his bank account. They get control of this board. They will liquidate everything for quick cash and destroy 40 years of work in a month. I looked at the trucks moving on the screen. I looked at the empire Otis had built in the shadows. The weight of it settled on my shoulders. It was heavy, but it felt right. I was not just fighting for a check anymore. I was fighting for the Black Oak, and I was the only one standing between this legacy and the vultures who wanted to pick it clean. Saul reached into the steel filing cabinet behind him and pulled out a thick document bound in blue leather. He placed it on the desk between us with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. "This is the Master Living Trust," he said, opening it to a page marked with a red tab. "Otis drafted this 5 years ago with my legal counsel. It is ironclad." He tapped his finger on a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "Read Article 4, Section C. It is titled, 'The Right of Choice.'" I leaned in, squinting at the fine print. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. It stated that the primary beneficiary of the Black Oak estate would be determined by the acceptance of the initial gift. It explicitly stated that any potential heir who destroyed, discarded, or refused the initial gift was legally exercising their right to disclaim interest. My breath caught in my throat. Disclaim interest. By throwing that check into the fire, Dante had not just been a jerk. He had unknowingly signed a legal document rejecting his entire inheritance, and because Renee had watched him do it and refused her own envelope, she had done the same. "This means they are out," I said, looking up at Saul. "They have no claim. The trust explicitly excludes them." Saul nodded slowly, but his expression remained grim. "In theory, yes. But in practice we have a problem. The burden of proof is on us. When we go to court next week, Dante will lie. He will say he never received the check, or he will say it was lost, or he will accuse you of stealing his portion. Without physical evidence of him destroying that check, it is your word against the word of a grieving family. And right now, the court sees you as a thief, and them as victims." My heart sank. Saul was right. Dante was a pathological liar, and Tiffany was a master manipulator. They would charm the judge, and I would look like the greedy granddaughter making up stories. We needed a smoking gun. I closed my eyes, trying to replay the scene in Dante's living room. The smell of the wine, the heat of the fire, the way Tiffany posed for pictures. Pictures. My eyes snapped open. Dante was obsessed with his image. He was obsessed with his possessions. He had spent $10,000 installing a state-of-the-art smart home security system just so he could watch his leased Mercedes from his phone. "The Sentinel system," I whispered. Saul looked at me confused. "The what?" "The cameras," I said, my voice rising with excitement. Dante installed 4K security cameras in every room of that house, including the living room. He wanted to be able to monitor the cleaning staff. The camera is mounted right above the bookshelf facing the fireplace. A slow smile spread across Saul's face. "Do you think it was recording?" "It records 24/7 to the cloud," I said. "He bragged about it all night. He said it keeps footage for 30 days. Saul leaned forward. "Can we get access?" I pulled the warehouse keys from my pocket, tossing them in my hand. "Dante is not a genius, Saul. He uses the same password for everything. It is his high school football jersey number and the word rich. All we need is a computer." Saul gestured to the wall of servers behind us. "Take your pick, Miss Nia. Let us go fishing." Saul pulled up a secure browser on the main terminal but stopped. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "I can manage servers, Miss Nia, but I am not a hacker. Accessing a private cloud account without authorization requires a specific set of skills that I do not possess." I smiled for the first time in hours. "I know a guy." I pulled out the burner phone Saul had given me since the police still had mine. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Who is this?" "It is 3 in the morning. Leo, it is Nia." I need a favor. A big one. There was a pause followed by the sound of shuffling and a keyboard clacking. Nia, I saw the news. They are saying you scammed your grandfather. I told my mom that was garbage. You were the only one who helped me pass calculus. What do you need? I need you to get into a Sentinel Home Security Cloud account. I need footage from December 24th. Leo laughed. Sentinel. That is barely a challenge. Their encryption is a joke. But I need a username or an email. And unless you want me to run a brute force attack which takes time, I need a guess at the password. I looked at Saul. I knew Dante better than anyone. He was a creature of habit, and his ego was his only guiding principle. His email is danterealtor@gmail.com, I said. And for the password, try Dante Rich Forever. Capital D, capital R, capital F. No numbers. Leo snorted on the other end of the line. You have got to be kidding me. That sounds like a gamer tag for a 12-year-old. Just try it, Leo. I heard the rapid tapping of keys, then silence, then a low whistle. We are in. I cannot believe that actually worked. Your brother really needs to read a book on cybersecurity. I am staring at his dashboard right now. It looks like he has cameras in every room, even the bathroom. That is disturbing. Ignore the bathroom, Leo, I said, leaning closer to the screen, even though he could not see me. Go to the living room. December 24th, around 7:30 p.m. Saul typed on our end, mirroring Leo's access. The massive screen on the wall flickered, and then a folder labeled Holiday Party appeared. I held my breath as Saul clicked the file. The video loaded instantly. Dante had bragged that he spent $10,000 on this system to watch his cleaning lady, and now that vanity was his undoing. The image was crystal clear 4K resolution with professional-grade audio. There it was. My mother holding her wine glass looking annoyed, Tiffany checking her makeup in her phone reflection, and Dante standing by the fireplace holding the check. The audio was crisp. It is a prop, Mom. From a closed account. I watched myself on the screen rushing forward. I watched Dante throw the paper into the flames, laughing like he was the king of the world. I watched the fire curl the edges. Leo's voice came through the speakerphone filled with awe. Whoa, did he just burn money? Like actual money. He sure did. Saul said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction, and he did it in high definition. I watched the video again. Every pixel was a nail in their coffin. It showed the intent. It showed the malice. And most importantly, it showed the destruction of the gift. Leo, save that file, I ordered. Save it to 3 different servers. And Leo, yeah, Nia. If anyone asks, you never saw this. I never saw what he said. I am just a guy playing video games. Good luck, Nia. Go get them. The line went dead. I looked at the screen where Dante's face was frozen in a pixelated laugh. He had typed Dante Rich Forever as his password. He had no idea that he had just handed me the key to making him poor forever. Saul unplugged the drive and handed it to me. We have the smoking gun, Miss Nia. Now let us go to court. The massive monitor on the wall flickered to life, revealing the high-definition interior of the house I used to call home. The timestamp in the top corner read, December 24th, 7:30 p.m. The clarity of the Sentinel system was terrifying. I could see the condensation on Dante's wine glass and the individual flames dancing in the gas fireplace. It felt like I was standing in the room with them again, a ghost haunting my own trauma. Saul stood silently beside me, his arms crossed as the scene played out. On screen, Dante was holding the check between 2 fingers like it was a dirty tissue. He turned to the camera almost as if he knew we were watching and flashed a grin that was pure malice. Watch this, he said, his voice crisp and clear through the warehouse speakers. This is what we do with fake money from fake people. He flicked his wrist and the check fluttered into the fire. I watched the paper curl. I watched the blue ink of Otis's signature turn black and disappear into ash. In the background, Tiffany clapped her hands. Oh my God, Dante, you are terrible. She laughed. But seriously, it was cluttering up the room. But it was what happened next that brought me to my knees. My mother Renee walked into the frame. She did not scold him. She did not look shocked. She walked over to the fireplace and stared at the dying embers of my inheritance. "Good riddance," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "I honestly do not know why she even came. Nia brings down the property value just by standing in the driveway. She is such a burden. Always has been. Sometimes I look at her and wonder how she came from me. Dante is a star, but Nia, she is just empty space. I should have cut her off years ago." I let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. Hearing your own mother call you a burden is a pain that has no physical equivalent. It is a fracture in your soul. I had spent 28 years trying to be good enough for her. I got good grades. I stayed out of trouble. I cared for Grandpa when she was too busy at the country club, and all she saw was empty space. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Saul. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me it would be okay. He simply handed me a tissue. I took it and wiped my face aggressively. That tear was not for me. It was for the little girl who used to wait by the window for her mother to come home. That little girl was dead now. I looked back at the screen. Dante was high-fiving Tiffany. They looked so happy, so secure in their cruelty. They thought they had burned a piece of paper. They had no idea they had just burned their own future. I stood up straighter, feeling the steel in my spine stiffen. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard anger. It was fuel. Pure, high-octane fuel. Saul reached over and hit the spacebar, freezing the video on my mother's sneering face. He looked at me, his expression grim but satisfied. "We have the act. We have the intent. And we have the witness testimony from the video itself. This is not just evidence, Miss Nia. This is a confession." He pulled the flash drive from the computer and slipped it into his breast pocket. "Enough looking at the past. You have seen who they really are. Now it is time to show them who you really are. We have a court date to prepare for. And I promise you, when we walk into that room, we are not bringing a knife to a gunfight. We are bringing a nuke." The courier arrived at the main gate of the warehouse just as the sun was breaking through the storm clouds. He was not a regular mailman. He was a process server, a man paid to deliver bad news with a neutral face. Saul met him at the security checkpoint, signing for the thick manila envelope with a grim expression. When he walked into the command center and placed the package on the desk, the thud it made sounded like a gavel striking wood. I knew what it was before I opened it. The return address was from the law firm of Sterling and Associates, the most expensive predatory legal team in the city, Tiffany's father. I tore open the seal and pulled out a stack of documents an inch thick. The bold text at the top read, "Emergency petition for full guardianship and revocation of trust." I sat down and forced myself to read every word. It was a masterpiece of fiction. The document painted a picture of a senile, helpless old man being preyed upon by his estranged, unstable granddaughter. It claimed that I had isolated Otis Black from his loving family, used psychological manipulation to confuse him, and embezzled funds for personal luxury purchases. It demanded an immediate freeze on all assets, the return of the commander elite, and a restraining order preventing me from coming within 500 feet of my grandfather. They were not just trying to win. They were trying to annihilate me. They wanted to strip me of my name, my freedom, and my future. A week ago, this document would have sent me into a panic attack. I would have hidden under my covers and cried until my eyes burned. But as I read the lies typed in crisp black ink, I did not feel fear. I felt disgust. And under the disgust, I felt power. They had made a fatal error. They had assumed that I was still the broke, terrified girl who let them step on her. They had assumed I was fighting alone. They did not know about the warehouse. They did not know about Saul. And they certainly did not know that I had a high-definition video of them burning their own claim to the estate. I tossed the legal brief onto the desk next to the flash drive. It slid across the smooth surface and came to a stop. I looked up at Saul, who was watching me closely, waiting to see if I would break. I stood up and smoothed out my blazer. I picked up the burner phone and dialed the number for the only tailor in the city who could fit a suit in 24 hours. Then I looked at Saul. "Get the car ready, Saul," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And call Mr. Henderson at the bank. Tell him we need the full legal team from the trust ready by Monday morning." Saul nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You are not going to run." "Run?" I asked, picking up the court summons and folding it neatly. "Why would I run? They invited me to a party. It would be rude not to show up. We are going to court, Saul. We are going to walk through the front door, and we are going to make sure that when we leave, they are the ones who need a ride home." The date was set for Monday at 9 in the morning. The Honorable Judge Reynolds was presiding. He was known for being tough on financial crimes and protective of the elderly. Renee and Dante probably thought they had him in their pocket. They thought Monday would be my execution. They had no idea it was going to be their funeral. I walked toward the exit, the sound of my boots on the warehouse floor echoing like the ticking of a clock. The countdown had begun. The steps of the Supreme Court building were not just crowded, they were a circus. Tiffany had been busy. She had tipped off every local news outlet, framing the hearing as a high-profile case of elder abuse in a wealthy family. Cameras flashed as soon as the black town car Saul had hired pulled up to the curb. I stepped out, not in my thrift store blazer, but in a charcoal power suit that Saul had commissioned for me. It fit like a second skin armor for the battle ahead. I kept my chin up, ignoring the reporters shouting questions about whether I had coerced my grandfather. I walked past them, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the concrete, Saul flanking me like a silent bodyguard. Inside courtroom 4, the atmosphere was suffocating. It was standing room only. On the left side, sitting behind the plaintiff's table, sat my family. They looked like a portrait of tragic nobility. Renee was dabbing dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Dante was wearing a somber navy suit, his head bowed in fake prayer. Tiffany was furiously typing on her phone, likely updating her followers on their brave struggle. They did not look at me as I took my seat at the defense table. They looked through me. To them, I was already a ghost. Judge Reynolds entered the room, his black robes billowing. He was a stern man with a face carved from granite, and he looked ready to dispense justice. He banged his gavel, silencing the murmurs of the gallery. Mr. Sterling, the family's high-priced attorney, stood up. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the jury box, exuding a toxic confidence. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court." Sterling began, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room. "We are here today to discuss a tragedy, not a death but a betrayal. The betrayal of a vulnerable, dementia-ridden patriarch by the very person sworn to protect him." He pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "The defendant, Nia Black, is a desperate woman. A woman with a history of financial instability. A woman who lost her job and saw her failing grandfather not as a loved one, but as a winning lottery ticket." He paced back and forth, weaving a narrative of my villainy. He described how I supposedly isolated Otis, how I manipulated his confused mind, and how I stole funds to purchase a luxury vehicle while he rotted in a state facility. He painted me as a parasite. I felt the eyes of the room burning into my back. The shame tried to rise up, the old familiar feeling of being small and worthless, but I pushed it down. I touched the flash drive in my pocket. Let him talk. Let him dig the hole deep. Sterling finished his opening statement with a flourish, leaning on the railing in front of my family. "We ask the court to intervene, to strip this predator of her access and return Mr. Otis Black to the loving arms of his daughter and grandson." He sat down to hushed whispers of agreement from the gallery. I looked over at the plaintiff's table. Renee was staring right at me. She wasn't crying anymore. Her lips were curled in a cold, victorious smirk. Her eyes were hard, and they said everything she wouldn't scream out loud. You are dead, Nia. You never should have fought us. I held her gaze, refusing to blink. She thought this was the end. She had no idea it was just the opening credits. Mr. Sterling called my mother to the stand. Renee rose from her seat, smoothing down the skirt of a modest beige dress she had never worn before. She had removed her diamonds and tied her hair back in a loose bun. She looked like a saint. She looked like a martyr. As she took the oath, her hand did not tremble. She swore to tell the truth so easily that I wondered if she even knew what the truth was anymore. Please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Sterling asked, his voice gentle and coaxing. Renee looked at me. For a split second, her eyes were cold and dead. Then she blinked, and suddenly they were swimming with tears. She pulled a tissue from her sleeve. It breaks my heart to be here, she said, her voice cracking perfectly. I love my daughter. I have tried to help her, but she has always been troubled. She has always been jealous of what others have. She paused to wipe a tear that managed to escape down her cheek. When my father got sick, I wanted to bring him home. We have plenty of room. We have the resources. But Nia insisted on the nursing home. She told me that he was a burden. She said he smelled like old age and that she did not want to deal with him. She forced my hand. She said if I did not put him away, she would make my life miserable. I gripped the edge of the defense table so hard my knuckles turned white. The room started to spin. She was using her own words. Every cruel thing she had ever said to me in the kitchen she was now putting in my mouth under oath. It was a projection so absolute it was almost impressive. Sterling nodded, looking at the jury to make sure they were absorbing the poison. And has there been a history of financial dishonesty with your daughter? Renee looked down at her hands, acting as if the question pained her physically. I wish I could say no. But when she was 12 years old, I caught her stealing from my purse. She took $300 intended for groceries. When I confronted her, she did not apologize. She laughed. She told me that she deserved it. She told me that the world owed her a living. That was when I knew something was broken inside of her. A collective gasp went through the gallery. The lie was so specific, so detailed, that it had the ring of truth. I felt the air in the room shift. The jury members who had looked neutral 10 minutes ago were now looking at me with narrowed eyes. They saw a monster. They saw a greedy child who had grown into a predatory woman. I saw a woman in the back row shake her head in disgust and whisper something to the man next to her. Renee finished her performance with a final plea. I just want to protect my father, she sobbed softly. I just want to save him from her greed. She stepped down from the stand and walked back to her seat. As she passed me, she did not look at me, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. It was the smallest of smiles. She had successfully assassinated my character, and she had done it without getting a single drop of blood on her beige dress. Mr. Sterling called my brother to the stand. Dante buttoned his Italian suit jacket and walked to the witness box with the confident stride of a man who believed his own press. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, but his eyes were darting around the room, soaking up the attention. To the jury, he looked like a successful young entrepreneur heartbroken by family tragedy. To me, he looked like a snake in a silk tie. Sterling wasted no time. Dante, please tell the court what you witnessed on the night of December 24th. Dante cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. He looked directly at the jury, his face composed into a mask of perfect sadness. I was in the hallway. I saw Nia mixing a drink in the kitchen. She was crushing something into the tea, a white powder. When she gave it to Grandpa, he got very quiet, very confused. Then I saw her put a pen in his hand. He tried to drop it, but she wrapped her fingers around his and forced him to sign that check. He was crying. It was the most horrible thing I have ever seen. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. It was a lie so audacious it took my breath away. He was describing a crime that never happened to cover up the crime he actually committed. Sterling nodded solemnly. And did you intervene? Dante looked down at his hands, feigning shame. I was in shock. I was terrified of her. Naya has been unstable for years. I didn't know what she would do if I stepped in. I regret it every day. I should have stopped her. Thank you, Dante. Sterling sat down looking satisfied. He had painted the picture perfectly. The drug addict's sister and the helpless, traumatized brother. Saul stood up slowly. He did not rush to the podium. He walked with a heavy, deliberate pace. He did not look angry. He looked like a hunter who had just watched a deer step into a snare. He stopped in front of Dante and rested his hands on the wooden railing. Mr. Dante, you have given us a very detailed account of that evening. Saul said, his voice low and even. You testified that you watched from the hallway. You testified that you saw my client drug Mr. Otis Black and force his signature. That is correct, Dante said, lifting his chin defiantly. I saw it with my own eyes. And you are testifying that you never touched that check, that you never saw it again after that moment. Never, Dante scoffed. Why would I touch dirty money obtained by fraud? Saul paused. He looked at the floor, then looked up at Dante, locking eyes with him. Memory is a tricky thing, Mr. Dante, especially under stress. I need to ask you one final question before we proceed. Are you absolutely certain about your recollection of the events in that living room? Is there any doubt in your mind? Any chance you might be forgetting something you did? Dante laughed. It was a short, arrogant sound. He leaned forward, a smirk touching the corner of his mouth. I have a photographic memory. I know exactly what happened. I am 100% certain of my testimony. Nia is a thief and a liar. Saul stared at him for a long, silent second. Then he smiled. It was a terrifying, cold smile. Thank you, Mr. Dante. You have been very clear. Saul turned to the judge, his voice ringing out like a bell. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce a piece of digital evidence that was recovered from the plaintiff's own cloud server. Exhibit A. Dante's smirk faltered. He looked at Saul, then at Tiffany, who had suddenly gone pale in the gallery. The trap had snapped shut, and he was still sitting inside it. Saul did not play the video immediately. Instead, he closed his laptop with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent courtroom. He turned to Judge Reynolds, his face unreadable. Your Honor, the prosecution has built their entire case on a single foundation. They claim that Mr. Otis Black is a senile, helpless invalid capable of being manipulated by a glass of tea. They claim he is mentally unfit to manage his own affairs, let alone a multi-million-dollar estate. He paused, walking slowly toward the center of the aisle. They claim he is broken. They claim he is a victim. The defense would like to refute these claims not with documents, but with reality. We call our final witness to the stand, Mr. Otis Black. A murmur of confusion rippled through the gallery. Dante looked at Tiffany and rolled his eyes. He clearly expected a nurse to wheel in a drooling, confused old man who would mumble nonsense and prove their point. Renee adjusted her pearls, preparing to look sympathetic for the cameras. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They did not creak. They flew open with authority. The room went deadly silent. There was no wheelchair. There was no nurse. There was no cane tapping against the floor. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked nothing like the shivering guest at the Christmas party. He was wearing a bespoke navy Tom Ford suit that was cut to perfection, emphasizing broad shoulders that had been hidden under rags for years. His shirt was crisp white silk. His shoes were polished obsidian. He was not stooped. He stood straight as a steel beam radiating a terrifying amount of power. The collective gasp from the audience sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out of the room at once. Renee let out a strangled cry that sounded like an animal in a trap. She grabbed Dante's arms so hard, her nails tore through the fabric of his jacket. Dante's mouth fell open, his jaw literally dropping as the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. He stared at the man in the doorway, with eyes wide with horror. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. In a way, he was. He was seeing the ghost of the man he thought he had successfully buried. Otis Black walked down the center aisle. He did not shuffle. He strode with the predatory grace of a lion patrolling his territory. He did not look at the cameras. He did not look at the jury. He kept his eyes locked on the plaintiff's table. His gaze was not watery or confused. It was sharp. It was cold. It was the gaze of a CEO who had crushed competitors for breakfast for 40 years. He stopped at the defense table. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a heavy, warm grip that grounded me. He winked at me, a quick spark of mischief that told me everything was going to be all right. Then he turned his attention back to his family. He walked past Renee and Dante. He did not say a word to them, but the look of disgust he gave them was louder than a scream. He stepped up to the witness stand and remained standing. He looked up at Judge Reynolds, who was staring over his spectacles in disbelief. "I am ready to testify, Your Honor." Otis said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the room without the need for a microphone. "And as you can see, I am quite lucid. I apologize for the theatrics, but sometimes to catch a rat, you have to play dead." Mr. Sterling tried to recover his composure, but the sweat glistening on his forehead gave him away. He approached the witness stand with a forced smile, treating Otis like a ticking bomb he had to defuse. "Mr. Black," he began, his voice dripping with false concern, "we are all relieved to see you looking so well. However, a sudden moment of clarity does not erase months of documented decline. Can you please tell the court what day it is?" Otis leaned back in the chair. He did not look at Sterling. He looked at the judge. "It is Monday, October 14th, Your Honor. The market opened this morning with the Dow Jones down 30 points due to the uncertainty in the tech sector. The current interest rate for a standard mortgage is 6.5%. And Mr. Sterling, according to the contract you signed with my daughter on Tuesday, you are billing her $450 an hour to ask me questions a first grader could answer." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Sterling turned red. He tried to interrupt, but Otis was just getting started. "Furthermore, regarding my mental state, let me quote the Probate Code Section 4000, which defines capacity. A person is of sound mind if they can understand the nature of their act and recollect the nature and situation of their property. I can list every asset in the Black Oak portfolio down to the serial numbers on the forklifts in the warehouse my granddaughter visited last night. Can you do the same, Mr. Sterling, or are you just parroting the lies my family paid you to say?" Sterling was silenced. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Otis turned his head slowly, locking his gaze onto Dante. My grandson sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, looking like a deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. "You testified that I was confused," Dante Otis said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "You told this court under oath that I did not know what I was signing. You said I was crying." Otis leaned forward, his hands gripping the railing of the witness box. "I was not crying because I was confused, Dante. I was crying because I was heartbroken. I sat there and watched you mock me. I watched you hold a check for $50,000, a gift I worked a lifetime to be able to give you, and you treated it like trash." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. "So tell me, grandson," Otis continued, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Who is the one with the cognitive decline? Is it the man who built an empire from nothing and hid it to protect it? Or is it the boy who burned $50,000 in a fireplace on Christmas Eve just to impress his friends on the internet?" Dante's mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. He looked at Renee for help, but she was staring at the table, unable to meet his eyes. Dante looked back at Otis, terror filling his face as the realization hit him. The old man had been awake the whole time. You remember?" He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I remember everything," Otis said. "And now so will the jury." Otis turned back to Judge Reynolds, his face composed and serious. "Your Honor, I wish to draw the court's attention to Article 4, Section C of the Black Oak Living Trust. It is titled, 'The Right of Choice.' My attorney has provided the full text. It explicitly states that the acceptance of the initial stipend is the prerequisite for all future inheritance. It further states that any potential beneficiary who knowingly destroys, discards, or refuses this initial gift is legally exercising their right to disclaim interest in the entire estate. Otis pointed a finger at the frozen image of Dante on the screen. By throwing that check into the fire, my grandson did not just burn $50,000. He legally signed a document rejecting his inheritance. And by standing there and watching him do it, my daughter Renee did the same. They made their choice, Your Honor. They chose ash over equity. Judge Reynolds looked at the document in front of him, then at the video screen, and finally at the pale, trembling figures at the plaintiff's table. He closed the file with a heavy thud. He picked up his gavel. The sound of it striking the wood was like a gunshot that ended the war. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, including digital proof of intent and the lucid testimony of Mr. Black himself, I am dismissing the petition for guardianship with prejudice. The court recognizes Ms. Nia Black as the sole trustee and primary beneficiary of the Black Oak estate. All restraining orders are lifted immediately. The judge narrowed his eyes, looking directly at Renee. And Mrs. Renee, let me be very clear. Your testimony today regarding your daughter's character and your father's mental state was a work of fiction. You are fortunate that I am not having you arrested for perjury right here and now. I suggest you leave my courtroom before I change my mind. Case closed. Renee stood up, her legs shaking so badly she had to grab the table for support. She looked at the judge, then at Dante, who was staring at his hands in shock. Then she looked at Otis. The arrogance was gone. The mask had shattered. She was just a middle-aged woman who realized she had gambled everything and lost. She rushed to the railing, reaching out for him. "Daddy, please!" she cried, her voice shrill and desperate. "We were just worried. We didn't know. Please don't do this. We are family." Otis did not flinch. He did not reach back. He stood as still as a statue, looking down at her with a profound sadness. He adjusted his silk cuffs and looked her dead in the eye. "You are right, Renee. You are family, and I gave you every chance to prove it. I wore that old coat to your party to see if you would offer me a seat. You offered me a newspaper so I wouldn't dirty your furniture." He leaned in close so only she could hear the final verdict. "You didn't want a father. You wanted an ATM. You chose the money over the man, Renee, and now you have neither." He turned his back on her and walked toward me. "Come on, Nia," he said, offering me his arm. "We have a company to run." We walked out of the courtroom together, leaving the weeping and the wailing behind us. The doors swung shut, and for the first time in my life, the silence sounded like victory. The ink on the court documents was barely dry when we returned to the command center at the warehouse. I sat in the leather chair behind the main desk, a seat that felt surprisingly natural. Saul placed a thick binder in front of me, labeled Residential Assets. He opened it to a page marked with a red flag. The address at the top made me pause. 1400 Skyline Drive. It was the address of the mansion where the Christmas party had been held, the house Dante claimed he had bought with his crypto earnings. I looked up at Saul, confused. Why is Dante's house in our ledger? Saul allowed himself a rare, dry chuckle. "Mr. Dante does not own that house, Miss Nia. He never has. He leases it from a shell company called Oakwood Holdings." "And who do you think owns Oakwood Holdings?" I looked back at the file. The parent company was Black Oak. My grandfather had been Dante's landlord for 3 years. I scanned the payment history. It was a sea of red ink: missed payment, partial payment, late fee, insufficient funds. Dante had not paid a dime of rent in 6 months. He was living in luxury on Otis's dime while calling Otis a leech. "He is $50,000 in arrears," Saul said, tapping the page. "Under the terms of the lease, the landlord has the right to immediate eviction upon change of management." I picked up the heavy fountain pen. My hand did not shake. I remembered the way Dante had laughed while burning the check. I remembered him lying on the witness stand trying to send me to prison. I signed my name at the bottom of the eviction order. Executed, I said. Now. 2 hours later, I pulled the Commander Elite up to the curb of the mansion. I did not go alone. 2 county sheriff cruisers were already blocking the driveway, their blue lights flashing against the darkening sky. The front door was open and I could hear Dante screaming before I even stepped out of the truck. You cannot do this. I own this house. I am going to sue you. Do you know who I am? I walked up the driveway. Dante was standing on the porch, clinging to the doorframe, while a deputy tried to pry his hands loose. He was wearing the same suit from court, now rumpled and stained with sweat. When he saw me, he stopped struggling. Nia, tell them, he shouted, desperation cracking his voice. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I own this place. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. I held up the file. You don't own anything, Dante. You leased this house from Oakwood Holdings, and Oakwood Holdings is a subsidiary of Black Oak. You have been living in Grandpa's house for free for 6 months while you tried to have him committed. Dante's face went slack. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The irony was suffocating. He had tried to steal the estate, not realizing the estate was the only roof over his head. The deputy finally peeled Dante's fingers off the frame. Step aside, sir. This property has been reclaimed by the owner. They dragged him down the steps. He stumbled, his expensive Italian loafers scuffing on the concrete. They didn't let him pack. They didn't let him take his furniture. He was left on the sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on his back and his phone. I stood over him. He looked up at me, tears of humiliation streaming down his face. Where am I supposed to go, Nia? I looked at the mansion, then back at him. I don't know, Dante. But I hear the homeless shelter downtown has vacancies, and unlike you, they don't charge rent. I turned and walked back to my truck, leaving him standing in the cold exactly where he belonged, on the outside looking in. I sat in the idling Commander Elite, watching the final act of my brother's tragedy play out through the windshield. The police cruisers had pulled away, leaving Dante standing alone on the sidewalk in the twilight. He looked small. He looked like a child waiting for a parent to come pick him up. He pulled his phone out and dialed frantically. I knew who he was calling. He was calling Tiffany. He expected his fiancée to pull up in her convertible and whisk him away to a hotel where they could plot their revenge. He expected loyalty. He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. The front door of the mansion flew open one last time. Tiffany stormed out. She was not running to hug him. She was struggling with 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases, and she looked furious. She was wearing her sunglasses, even though the sun had gone down, shielding her eyes from the reality of her situation. Behind her, she kicked a black garbage bag down the stairs. It tumbled end over end and split open on the driveway, spilling Dante's designer sneakers and silk shirts onto the wet pavement. Dante ran toward her, his face lighting up with a pathetic hope. Babe, thank God. We have to go. Nia is crazy. She bribed the police. We need to go to your dad's house and fix this. Tiffany stopped. She looked at him with a disgust so potent I could feel it from inside my truck. She did not reach out for him. She recoiled as if he were contagious. Fix this, she snapped, her voice shrill and echoing in the quiet street. There is no fixing this, Dante. You are evicted, you are broke, and worst of all, you are publicly humiliated. My father called me 10 minutes ago. He saw the news. He said you are a liability. He said if I stay with you, I am cut off too. Dante froze. But we are getting married. We are a team. Tiffany laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. A team. Dante, look at you. You have nothing. You promised me the Black Oak fortune. You promised me a lifestyle. Instead, you dragged me into a courtroom and made me look like a fool. I signed up for a CEO, not a charity case. She reached for her left hand. The diamond engagement ring he had bought on credit sparked under the streetlights. She ripped it off her finger. It did not slide off easily, but she forced it, scratching her skin in her haste to be free of him. Here she screamed, throwing the ring at his chest. It bounced off his lapel, and clattered into the gutter, disappearing into the dark water. Sell it. Maybe it will buy you a bus ticket out of town. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb, its headlights illuminating Dante's stunned face. Tiffany didn't look back. She signaled the driver to pop the trunk. She heaved her expensive bags inside, protecting her leather goods, while Dante's clothes soaked in the puddle on the driveway. "Tiffany, please," Dante begged, stepping toward the cab. "I love you." Tiffany slammed the car door. She rolled down the window just an inch. Her eyes were dry. Her makeup was perfect. "I do not live with failures, Dante. Goodbye." The taxi sped off, tires screeching, leaving the scent of exhaust and expensive perfume in the air. Dante stood there for a long time, staring at the empty street. Then his legs seemed to give out. He collapsed onto the cold concrete, sitting right in the middle of his scattered wardrobe. He put his head in his hands and his shoulders began to shake. He had lost the house. He had lost the girl. He had lost the money. And for the first time, he had no one to blame but himself. I shifted the truck into drive and pulled away, leaving him in the rearview mirror, a lonely silhouette in the ruin of his own making. The glass doors of the new executive suite at Black Oak Logistics slid open with a soft hiss. My assistant buzzed me a moment earlier, sounding hesitant, but I told her to let the visitor in. I wanted this meeting. I needed to close the final loop. Renee walked in. She looked different than she had in the courtroom. The beige martyr dress was gone, replaced by a soft cardigan and slacks. She looked tired. Her hair was a little messy, calculatedly, so to evoke sympathy. She was carrying a plastic Tupperware container in her hands, holding it like it was a peace offering to an angry god. She stopped in front of my massive mahogany desk. She looked around the room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling warehouse floor below. She saw the power. She saw the empire she had tried to burn down. "Hi, Nia," she said, her voice small and trembling. I did not stand up. I did not smile. I leaned back in my leather chair and waited. "I brought you something," she said, placing the container on the desk. "It is chicken dumpling soup, your favorite. I remembered you always loved it when you were sick or had a bad day. I thought maybe you were working late and you might be hungry." The smell of dill and chicken broth drifted across the desk. For a split second, it transported me back to being 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a scraped knee, waiting for Mommy to make it better. It was a powerful scent. It was a weaponized memory. I stared at the plastic lid. "You testified under oath 3 days ago that I was a thief, Renee. You told a jury I was empty space." Renee flinched. Tears began to well up in her eyes, instant and plentiful. "I know, baby. I know. I was so confused. Dante, he told me so many things." He twisted my head around. "I was scared. I thought you were hurting Grandpa. You have to understand, a mother's instinct is to protect. I made a mistake." She reached across the desk, trying to touch my hand. I pulled it back. "I am your mother, Nia." She pleaded, the tears now flowing freely. "We are flesh and blood. You can't just throw that away because of a misunderstanding. We are family. I am the only mother you have. We can start over. I can help you run this place. I have ideas. We can be a team, just us girls." I listened to her speech. I dissected it. It was not an apology. It was a job application. She saw Dante living on the street, and she saw me sitting in the CEO's chair. She was like a rat jumping from a sinking ship to a luxury liner. She didn't love me. She loved the safety I could provide. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the calculation behind the tears. I saw the greed hiding behind the cardigan. The little girl inside me who craved her approval finally died. In her place sat a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. I reached out and placed my hand on the warm container of soup. Renee smiled, thinking she had won, thinking the soup was the magic key to my bank account. I slid the container back across the desk toward her. It stopped right at the edge. "Take this," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Renee's smile faltered. "What?" "Take the soup, Renee. But I made it for you." "I am not hungry," I said. "But I know someone who is. I heard Dante is sleeping on a bench near the bus station. It is going to be cold tonight. He needs a hot meal a lot more than I do." Renee gasped. "Nia, how can you be so cruel? He is your brother." "No," I said, standing up. "He is your son. You created him. You raised him to be useless and entitled. You sided with him when you thought he had the money. Now you can side with him in the gutter." I pressed the button on my intercom. "Security, please escort Mrs. Renee out of the building and ensure she is removed from the visitor list permanently." Renee stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. The mask of the loving mother fell away, replaced by a look of pure venom. She grabbed the soup, her knuckles white. "You will regret this, Nia. You will be all alone." I smiled. I would rather be alone in a castle than held hostage in a cage. "Goodbye, Mother." Two guards appeared at the door. Renee turned and marched out, clutching her soup, the last remnant of her failed manipulation. I watched her go. When the doors slid shut, the silence in the office wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I turned my chair to face the window, looking out over the fleet of trucks carrying my name. I had cut off the dead weight. Now I could finally fly. I didn't treat Black Oak like a piggy bank the way my family intended. I treated it like a puzzle that I had been training to solve my whole life. My years spent managing the floor of a logistics center were not wasted time. They were my education. I knew exactly where the bottlenecks were because I used to be the one stuck in them. The first month was a whirlwind of motion. I fired the expensive consultants who had never lifted a box in their lives, and I promoted the shift supervisors who knew the business inside and out. I replaced the archaic paper manifest system with a cloud-based tracking network that I designed on a napkin during my lunch break. I walked the floor in steel-toed boots, not heels, listening to the drivers and the packers. For the first time in years, the company wasn't just profitable, it was efficient. Saul stood by my side watching the transformation with a quiet pride. He told me that the warehouse had not hummed with this kind of energy since 1999. But the most important project wasn't the business. It was the home. I didn't move into the hollow mansion on Skyline Drive. I let the bank take that cold monument to Dante's ego. Instead, I drove the Commander Elite to the old neighborhood where Grandpa Otis had raised my mother. The small brick bungalow on Elm Street had been sold years ago, but with the Black Oak Capital backing me, repurchasing it was just a formality. It was a wreck when we got the keys. The roof leaked, and the garden was a jungle of weeds. But it had good bones. Grandpa Otis and I spent our weekends there. It wasn't work, it was therapy. We stripped the peeling wallpaper and painted the walls a warm, inviting yellow. We planted hydrangeas in the front yard, just like the ones my grandmother used to tend. We filled the living room not with Italian leather furniture that we were afraid to sit on, but with comfortable armchairs and shelves full of real books. On a crisp Tuesday evening, 6 months after the trial, I stood on the newly repaired front porch. I watched Grandpa Otis sitting in his rocking chair, a mug of hot tea in his hand, watching the sunset. He looked younger than he had in years. The shadow of the nursing home was gone, replaced by the peace of a man who knows his legacy is safe. I caught my reflection in the front window. The woman staring back at me was a stranger to the Nia of 6 months ago. That girl had been hunched over, terrified of conflict, apologizing for her own existence. The woman in the glass stood tall, her shoulders were back, her eyes were sharp and clear. She was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar logistics empire. She was a protector. She was a survivor. I walked over and sat on the railing next to Otis. He looked up and smiled, patting my hand. "You did good, kid," he said softly. "You did good." I looked out at the street. at the life I had built from the ashes of betrayal. I didn't need the validation anymore, but hearing it from him meant the world. I wasn't just Nia the granddaughter. I was Nia the architect of my own destiny. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the storm to pass. I was the one directing the wind. I pulled the Commander Elite into the parking lot of a generic fast food joint on the edge of town. It was 2 in the afternoon, and I had missed lunch while reviewing quarterly projections with Saul. My stomach was growling loud enough to rival the engine. I adjusted my sunglasses and walked inside, craving nothing more than a greasy cheeseburger and 10 minutes of silence. The place was loud, filled with the smell of fryer oil and cheap disinfectant. I ordered at the kiosk and stood by the pickup counter checking emails on my phone. A commotion in the dining area caught my attention. A teenager had spilled a large soda and was laughing while his friends filmed the puddle spreading across the tile floor. "Hey, clean up on aisle 4, the kid shouted, snapping his fingers. A man in a neon orange uniform hurried out from the back kitchen. He was carrying a mop bucket and keeping his head low. He looked exhausted. His movements were stiff and his shoes were generic black slip-resistant sneakers. He knelt down to wipe up the sticky mess while the teenagers mocked him. I froze. I knew the curve of those shoulders. I knew the way he clenched his jaw when he was humiliated. It was Dante. The Dante of 6 months ago would have screamed at the kids. He would have threatened to sue the restaurant. He would have demanded respect he had not earned. But this Dante just scrubbed the floor, his face burning with shame. He looked thinner. The arrogance had been sweated out of him, leaving only a hollow shell of a man who finally understood the value of $1 because he had to earn it $10 an hour at a time. A dark, vindictive part of me wanted to walk over there. I wanted to stand over him in my tailored suit and watch him look up. I wanted to order a drink and make him fetch it. It would be the perfect poetic justice. The queen on her throne and the peasant in the muck. But as I watched him wring out the dirty mop rag, the anger didn't come. Instead, I felt a profound pity. He wasn't a villain anymore. He was just a pathetic guy who had lost the only game he knew how to play. Humiliating him further wouldn't make me stronger. It would just make me like him. I reached into my bag and pulled out a company envelope. I grabbed a pen from the counter. I did not put cash inside. Cash was what destroyed him. Instead, I pulled a brochure from my planner. It was for the community college vocational program, welding, plumbing, and electrical work. Fully funded grants for low-income applicants. A path to a real life built with real hands. I scribbled a note on the back. Nobody owes you a living. Build one yourself. I handed the envelope to the cashier, along with a $20 bill. Give this to the guy mopping the floor, I said softly. And buy him lunch. Tell him to take a break. I walked out before he could see me. I sat in my truck and watched through the glass. The cashier walked over and tapped Dante on the shoulder. He looked terrified, probably expecting to be fired. She handed him the envelope and a tray of food. He opened the envelope. I saw him read the note. He stiffened. He looked around the restaurant, his eyes scanning the parking lot until they landed on the black Commander Elite. He knew. He didn't tear it up. He didn't throw it away. He sat down in the nearest booth, oblivious to the mess around him. He held the brochure like it was a lifeline. I saw his shoulders heave. He covered his face with his hands, and for the first time in his life, Dante cried, not because he didn't get what he wanted, but because he finally got what he needed. A second chance. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving him to walk his own road. The snow fell softly outside the window of the renovated bungalow, coating the world in a blanket of white silence. Inside the living room, the air smelled of real pine needles and cinnamon. There was no catering staff moving silently in the background. There were no influencers taking selfies by the tree. There was just the crackle of oak logs burning in the hearth, and the sound of my grandfather humming an old jazz tune. I walked in from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. I handed one to Otis, who was sitting in his favorite armchair, his feet resting on the ottoman. He took it with a smile, his hands steady and strong. He looked at the tree, which was decorated not with gold-plated ornaments, but with the macaroni stars I had made in kindergarten and the faded glass baubles my grandmother had collected over 40 years. It was imperfect. It was cluttered. It was beautiful. "Merry Christmas, Nia," he said, taking a sip. "It is a little quieter than last year, isn't it?" I sat down on the rug near the fire, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic mug. Thank God for that. I don't miss the noise, Grandpa. I don't miss the performance. Otis set his mug down on the side table. He reached behind his chair and pulled out a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple piece of twine. He held it out to me. "I didn't get you a check this year," he said, his eyes twinkling with a soft light. "I figured you have enough work managing the payroll at the company. So I went digging in the attic. I found something I thought belonged with you." I took the box. It was light. My heart gave a small squeeze. Last year, a box this size from my family would have contained a passive-aggressive note or a cheap trinket bought as an afterthought. I untied the twine and carefully peeled back the paper. Inside, folded neatly, was a scarf. It was not cashmere. It was not silk from Italy. It was a thick, slightly scratchy wool knit in a pattern of deep burgundy and gray. I lifted it out, and the scent hit me instantly. Lavender and old books. It was the smell of safety. "Grandma's," I whispered, burying my face in the fabric. "She knitted that the winter before she passed." Otis said softly, looking at the fire. "She never got to finish the fringe on the end. She wanted you to have it, but after she died and things got complicated with Renee, I hid it away. I was afraid they would throw it out or give it to the dog. It needs to be with the woman who has her spirit." I ran my fingers over the uneven stitches. I could see where her hands had tired, where she had dropped a stitch and picked it back up. It was a map of her love. It was a piece of time that had been frozen and saved just for me. Dante had burned $50,000 because he thought it was too little. He had thrown away a fortune because he didn't understand value. I looked at the old wool scarf in my hands. I would not trade it for the mansion. I would not trade it for the Commander Elite. I wrapped the scarf around my neck, pulling it tight. It was warmer than any fire. I looked up at Otis, who was watching me with a look of pure contentment. "Thank you, Grandpa," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It is not much," Otis said, shrugging. "Just a bit of old yarn." "No." I shook my head, smiling through the tears that were starting to blur my vision. "You are wrong. This is the most expensive gift I have ever received, because it is the only one that is real." I leaned back against the armchair, watching the firelight dance on the walls. The house was small, but my heart felt enormous. We didn't have a crowd. We didn't have applause. But as the snow piled up against the door, I realized we had the one thing money could never buy. We had peace. And for the first time in my life, I finally knew what it felt like to be truly rich. The camera pulls back slowly to reveal me sitting comfortably on the distressed leather sofa in the living room of the renovated bungalow. The fire we built earlier is now glowing embers, casting a warm orange light across the room. I am no longer the frantic girl in the cheap blazer trying to prove her worth. I am wearing a soft cashmere sweater, and my posture is relaxed. I look directly into the lens, breaking the fourth wall for the first time since this story began. I look back at that Christmas Eve, and I see it with perfect clarity now. It was never about the money. It was a test of vision. My family looked at an old man in a frayed coat and saw a burden. They looked at a check for $50,000 and saw an insult. They were so obsessed with the appearance of wealth that they missed the substance of it. They were chasing a mirage while standing in the middle of an oasis. People ask me if I enjoy their downfall. They ask if I feel good knowing Dante is scrubbing floors and Renee is alone. The truth is, I don't feel joy about it. I feel relief. I feel the relief of someone who finally put down a heavy suitcase they had been carrying for 20 years. I stopped trying to buy their love with my compliance. I stopped trying to be good enough for people who are bad for me. I lean forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. I want you to remember this. Never let your ego become more expensive than your bank account. Dante thought he was too good for a handout. He thought he was a king who deserved a crown, not a check. So he threw it in the fire. He burned $50,000 to buy a lesson in poverty. That has to be the most expensive tuition in history. He paid for his arrogance with his future. And me, I did the opposite. I didn't look at the amount. I looked at the hands that gave it to me. I saw the sacrifice. I saw the love. I sent my faith into a bank that doesn't have a branch on every corner. I deposited my loyalty in the account of doing the right thing. And the interest rate. It turned out to be higher than anything Wall Street could ever offer. The dividends are not just the logistics company or the warehouse or this house. The real profit is this peace. The real wealth is knowing that when I go to sleep at night, I don't have to worry about being exposed because I have nothing to hide. So the next time life hands you a small envelope, do not be too quick to judge it. Do not let your pride blind you to a blessing just because it comes in a wrapper you do not like. Open it. Cherish it. Because sometimes the smallest keys open the biggest doors. And sometimes the people who look like they have nothing are the ones who can give you everything. I reach for the porcelain teacup steaming on the coffee table. I lift it in a silent toast to the camera. My expression is not smug, but it is satisfied. It is the look of a woman who played the long game and won. Here is to knowing your worth. I take a slow sip and give the camera a quick, knowing wink. The screen fades to black as the soulful sound of a jazz trumpet rises in the darkness, closing the final chapter. The most profound lesson from this story is that arrogance is the most expensive luxury a person can buy. Dante and Renee were so obsessed with the appearance of status that they burned their actual future, mistaking humility for weakness. Naya triumphed not through ruthlessness, but because she understood that true value isn't found in a price tag, but in loyalty and integrity. She treated a small gift with respect, and in doing so, unlocked an empire. It serves as a powerful warning: never let your pride become more valuable than your character, because the road to ruin is paved with ego. If this story inspired you to value the real over the shiny hit like and subscribe for more tales of justice served.